You're live on your election headquarters here on the Joy News channel on Multi TV. You're watching The Pulse. Well, today the former president John Agyekum Kufuor has criticized the framers of the 1992 Constitution for failing to undertake adequate research before deciding on the duration of the president for the country. Speaking at the International Society for African Philosophy and Studies Conference on the theme Democracy, Justice and Development in Africa 50 years after independence, the former president said it was difficult for any developing nation to undertake the near development within a 4-year term as indicated in the Constitution. Well, my colleague Joseph Akabile was at that conference and joins me in the studio with more. Joseph, we've had some concerns about the 4-year tenure of the president here in Ghana. What was new about this call today?
This time around, he made a call citing his personal experience as the president to reiterate the call he had made in the past. And the point he was making was the fact that as a leader of the country in his first 4-year term, Ghana had to go HIPIC and we also had to go for an IF program at a point in time. And he explained that for the HIPIC program, for more than 2 years, we couldn't access credit facilities. So he argued that for such a duration, if you want to undertake massive development and you're not fortunate and you have just a single term, how do you access enough funds to be able to undertake those projects? So he thinks if the period was much longer, it would have enabled the president to, once you come in, you can go in for whatever agreement. Even if it bans you from accessing enough loan facilities, you can even get more money and still have more time to undertake the needed projects. He talked about the fact that our system has more or less, it's a copy of the American system. That's why we opted for a 4-year term. He thinks it was very important as a developing nation, we assessed our situation and decided that due to the nature of the development we want to undertake, an extension of the period would have been much better.
Okay, let's hear from him then.
Well, if you are talking of our national life from time of independence, then I would say the Constitution with which we launched ourselves into independence borrowed a lot from what has been described as the European Western outlooks and philosophies. We cannot say that those philosophies were exclusively national to us. But before independence, we had communities and societies and states way back, perhaps running into hundreds of years, if not thousands, and they had philosophical underpinnings of the way they governed themselves. Some of those philosophies were carried over into independence. This is why our Constitution, even to date, provide for inclusion of chiefs in decentralization of governance, local government in particular. Somehow, though, I believe governance since independence has not been well marked by our philosophical outlooks from is it traditional and native societies. We've tended to veer towards what I may describe as European philosophies. We've been talking ideologies that really do not have roots in our traditional thoughts, and much of which I suspect haven't been well analyzed, scrutinized, for us to really take the benefits, the kernels of those ideologies to enrich our governance. When you look at even the current Constitution, for instance, providing for 4-year terms, 4-year term, I would say, is a copy of the American system. We are a developing country, very young, and I believe the overriding concern of our peoples is development, physical and other developments. If the framers of the Constitution had really addressed the issue of development for young, struggling, and generally, let me spread it here, African communities. I'm sure copying the American 4-year term wouldn't have been part of the Constitution. But we didn't examine. We just went in there, talked about multi-party democracy, said 4-year term, and if the people chose, they would repeat a government another term, and that would be the end of it. Making it seem like we expect any marked development, any marked transformation within 4 years of governance in economies that are struggling.
So that's the point he makes there, justifying the need for an extension of the tenure for the president. 4 years, in his view, is not enough. But Joseph, I'm sure there was some pushback when he made the suggestion.
Yeah, the concerns had to do with the fact that if there is an extension and the country is not fortunate and you have a president who is not performing or a bad leader, then what happens? It means the citizens have to wait for a long time. But he says, first and foremost, it has to do with building a strong civil and public service. And when you have that in place, then again, we can also look at a second chamber that will be higher than parliament, and that will act as an adequate check on the president, such that you, even if you are bad, you don't have the means of perpetuating that badness in you.
That's interesting. Let's hear from him on that.
I've talked of the tenure. I should also think, instead of going the Council of State, we should go openly for the Senate, a second chamber. A second chamber not filled with party lines, but on institutional representation largely, balancing regions, balancing professions, and the role of that, it might not be directly democratic, but it would enrich the institutional operations within the Constitution, because when you have a chamber like that, that will do the vetting of ministers, then the majority in the lower house would not rush to approve appointment just on basis that he's a colleague of party. Or I pick somebody from tribe not too deserving. That body of people who have achieved and people with records to protect would really scrutinize to ensure that the nominee deserves. Second opinion, we tend to rush through Parliament bills that would need a lot of time to think through. But where we operate on basis of just majority and that sort of thing, something that should have taken 1 month takes a day or two and it's passed to the cost of the nation. But so second chamber, I believe, is something we should seriously think of. People tend to talk of economics, but that is being penny wise and pound foolish. The savings from a second chamber, well composed, would be, and that too would, it holds, contains the presidency if we want to. And so we think along those lines to amend the Constitution.
So those are the ideas of former President John Agyekum speaking to the other forum to promote democracy in not only Ghana but in Africa. Joseph, yes, we've heard him speak, but what were some of the reactions you got from those who made it to this forum, who listened to him keenly?
They were very much interested in this idea of extension, and it was one that engaged them for a long time, even after the program had ended. And there were some views to the effect that an extension may not be good, and they were trying to find out from the former president the specific number of years he would recommend. That was when he mentioned either 6 or 7 years. But then again, he even thinks that if 6 or 7 is too much, 5 won't be bad. He just thinks the 4 is not enough. But then again, for the participants, some just couldn't agree with that because they have the opinion that the 4 is enough. After 4 years, we get a chance to vote you out or we'll give you another tenure. Okay,
thank you, Joseph. That's what happened today when the former President John Agyekum shared his thoughts on what we can do to improve our democracy. He's looking at an extension of the tenure for the president. Do you agree? You can send us your views and comments via social media on Facebook and on Twitter at Joy News on TV. From the former president to the country's president now, President John Mahama, he's been spending a good part of today at the Burma camp here in Accra, where he commissioned the country's first naval headquarters building. He was beautifully dressed in his military attire as Commander-in-Chief of the Ghana Armed Forces today, but that's not the focus really. He's been applauding the Navy for safeguarding the country's territorial waters.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I berth the ship, let me also indicate that the government of Ghana acknowledges the invaluable contributions of the Ghana Navy towards the nation's economic, social, and political development by ensuring peace and security within the country's maritime domain. The Navy's successes in anti-piracy operations have brought credit not only to itself, but to the entire nation of Ghana. This has lent credence to government's efforts to rid our waters of maritime-related crime. It is widely acknowledged that Ghana's waters are the safest in West Africa, thanks to the Ghana Navy. No wonder many ships drop anchor offshore Ghana until it is time for them to enter ports in our neighboring countries. This is no mean achievement, and the government of Ghana is proud of our Navy in this respect. It is very important at this moment to reiterate the point that all the oil and gas discoveries in Ghana so far are several miles offshore in deep water. The infrastructure associated with these offshore oil and gas industry are highly vulnerable to many threats, including maritime border disputes, oil theft, piracy, and armed robbery at sea. They are also exposed to accidents and the rigors of the environment. Hence, I expect a lot from the Navy in the protection of these assets in order to boost investor confidence in our maritime domain. Protection of such facilities is a multidisciplinary and multi-agency task, and this can only be effectively handled through comprehensive strategies.
So as the president today, you may not find him in this kind of attire on a regular, in the military uniform, and that's already caused some buzz on social media. Jennifer was at that program today, joins me in the studio. Jennifer, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Francis.
When was the last time you saw a sitting president in that uniform?
That would have to be former President Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings.
Yeah,
actually.
exactly.
Yes, he was, very revolutionary, always dressed in his
okay.
full army.
So what was the kind of response or the reaction you got from first the military men, the soldiers who were there at the program, and then the other, members of the general public when they saw him in this uniform?
Well, from the armed forces, the response was very visceral. They all responded, gave him loud applause, a lot of cheers. So everyone was wondering what exactly was going on until we saw him wearing the, the full army uniform. And even some of the soldiers behind me were wondering, oh, so which rank, have they given him on the uniform, and asking questions like that. And they said, oh, well, he's, he's commander-in-chief, so he's definitely entitled. From the civilians as well, we thought it was a very interesting move for him to, dress like that, to come and address the armed forces. And this is the first time that he's done it. So,
okay.
They were very impressed.
In his address, did he say anything about why he was dressed like that?
No, he made no allusion to it at all. I think it was like, oh, he just, it's kind of assumed, oh, I'm the commander-in-chief, I'm dressing like a commander-in-chief.
Okay. So on the issues he discussed today, beyond the safeguarding of the country's territorial waters, what were some of the issues that he spent time touching on?
Well, as we watched previously, just earlier, he was very proud of the efforts that the Navy has made in protecting Ghana's offshore assets, that's in the oil and gas industry, as well as the environment. And he also touched on the peacekeeping allowances for Ghana's soldiers who are currently on missions outside of the country, because it's one of the pressing issues that they raised during the Durbar that they had after the commissioning of the naval headquarters.
We can hear from him now.
Let me acknowledge with pride as your Commander-in-Chief the sacrifices, the commitments, professionalism, and dedication of all ranks in our peacekeeping theaters. Your major concern as far as external peacekeeping duties have to do a lot with the prompt payment of allowances. I know this is a key issue, and also the quantity of the allowances. I will comment on that in due course. Since the late President J.E.A. Mills increased the rates to the current rate per day during the first few months of our administration, there has been no increment. And together with the Armed Forces Council and the High Command, we've decided to increase by $1 a day the rate that is paid to peacekeeping soldiers who go out. And so an additional $31 per month will be added to the allowance that is paid.
Appreciate it.
Your hardworking Chief of Defense Staff and your service commanders have been leading various efforts, and following my discussion with the Armed Forces Council, chaired by the Vice President, Emi Sarata, I've directed that we revert to the previous arrangement for paying allowances. The new arrangement is a bit officious, and it takes time before these allowances are paid. And so we're reverting to the situation where the operational allowance was kept by the High Command and paid directly when it was time to pay. And so I'm sure you'll see an improvement in the promptness of paying allowances to men on peacekeeping.
Right, that's President John Mahama in the military uniform. I need to mention that again because it's not often that you see the nation's president in that kind of uniform on official duty. And what better occasion to do this than meeting the military men themselves? Jennifer, we know that the Naval Headquarters was commissioned today. Yeah. What's special about it?
Well, the Naval Headquarters, it's, a brand new building with a very long history. It officially started in 1966. There was some stalling. Then they started again in 1997. Up to about 2003, there was a stall again in development up to 2013. But when you see the building, you'll understand why it took maybe 13 years to do. It's 2 stories plus, an underground basement where they have a gym, where they have storage space. It really is fully outfitted for whatever the Navy needs in order to do the work that they are doing. Glass plated, very stylish, and obviously it could be because the one who contracted it is a woman, Mrs. Karieka.
I knew you tossing the gender card there, but thank you, Jennifer, for the details of what happened today at the Birmingham. The president was there to commission the Naval Headquarters dressed like a military man, like a military officer.